Hey everybody, ronarray here, and Path of Exile 2 New League, Dawn of the Hunt is very close. In this video, I wanted to share 20 useful tips that you will need to keep in mind to have a smooth early progression. Let's go! So first and pretty important tip to feel good right now is using appropriate loot filter. A lot of us picked a special loot filters for later part in the game and in the endgame in general. Some of those loot filters are hiding a lot of items. Basically a lot of basic currency and a lot of basic items too. So before starting Dawn of the Hunt, make sure that you are using appropriate loot filter that has leveling characters in mind and will not hide too many items, so your progression will be slower because of this. Just using Neversink as your main loot filter could be a pretty great idea. Make sure you're updating it before Dawn of the Hunt starts to also make sure that your new unique that could drop will not be hidden. Since patch notes that time is very late, I think rerolling some particular parts of your build could be a very great thing even early in the campaign. So if you feel like you like to start your character with some particular combinations of skills that you're familiar with, or some particular part of the build that you're familiar with, don't be afraid to just pick it and maybe just reroll to the builds that you will like later on in the campaign, and maybe even when you will be able to properly reach endgame and waystones. Rerolling in Path of Exile 2 is not that hard, and if your road will be planned correctly, you always will be able to reroll later. So if you feel like some particular passives or some particular approach is not working for you at the moment, don't be afraid to just go to scene and reroll some particular parts of your character. Just refine passives that you think are currently not working for you, and you will be able to reinvest them later. Just make sure you're not spending all your gold for rerolling, because gold management is playing a pretty big role at the start of the campaign. Another very important part for the smooth progression during the campaign is picking a particular weapon which will help you to deal the damage to your enemies. A lot of people are trying to stick with one weapon for a pretty long time, but to be successful you need to constantly repick weapons for a good basis that you can use to just deal more damage. So try to constantly check all the weapons in terms of either increasing your DPS, and you can do at least a little more, so check them at vendors, check rare items that drop in for you. It doesn't matter if you're playing an attack build or if you're playing a mage build. However, I think for attack builds it's even more important because you can also get a cool implicit. For example, at the boss you can get bow attacks fire an additional arrow in the second act, and that's a very cool bonus which can improve your damage significantly, so try to look for such bases. It also goes for quarterstaves, for example, and even for maces. So try to check your DPS pretty often and make sure that your weapon is always up to date and not outdated, because if your weapon will be outdated you will have a very hard time progressing through campaign. Since you're going to check vendors pretty often, I heavily recommend to use some particular Regex to check the vendors a little more faster. So generally you would probably like to have speed in there, because that way you can search for boots with movement speed at the start of the campaign. Those boots can improve your whole experience significantly, so I heavily recommend to add the speed there. I'm also recommending to just add some particular elemental parts, so cold or fire or lightning, which you prefer at the moment. When you're doing rejects, you can literally delete everything, write everything that you like, for example speed, and you will need to have that little thing to pretty much divide your search. After that, add cold, for example, and here we are going to have a boots with movement speed, and we're going to have a lot of weapons which could have a speed modifier or, for example, cold modifier. On top of it you can add life, for example, and that way you'll have all items that have life on them. Changing that based on what you currently want to find, it's a pretty good idea, so create the rejects that you would like to use yourself and change it just based on your needs at the moment. Just make sure that you're not adding too many modifiers, because if you will add too many things will be showcased. For example, if you're adding life, there's a lot of items with life modifiers because of the life regeneration per second and additional things like that. Another great tip for faster progression is always utilizing the movement skills that you can utilize at the moment. So if you have enough STR, going for a shield charge pretty early is a very good idea. Same goes for Lip Slam if you can use it and have enough STR at the moment. And at higher levels, you can also go for Spirit Gems such as Blinks are at level 58, and that could speed up your progression significantly. Even if you don't have a proper shield and you're not really using it correctly, you just set shield charge to your second weapon set and use shield as your second weapon set too. So that time when you're moving and clicking that button, you're going to move with shield charge, and when you're clicking your main attack skill, you're just going to change weapon back. That way you can progress a little faster through the campaign, but you will need to keep in mind that you will need to get STR pretty often, and that could be hard. You can also use the Regex that I already showcased to find STR related items and to make sure that you have enough STR to at least use a shield charge. For shield charge you will need approximately from 30 to 40 STR to use it during the campaign leveling. At higher levels it's also much easier because you can just roll some particular parts with attributes such as amulets or even boots, gloves and any other kind of items. Another important thing that should help you a lot to travel faster through your campaign is pretty much utilizing checkpoints. GG added a lot of checkpoints across your line, so in many locations it's a better idea to just run across, take all the checkpoints and after that move through them. So for example, like in Clearfell, you can actually pick the checkpoints at Grailwood, checkpoint in Mudburrow, and just move very fast between them. That way you can also make it much easier for yourself to come back if something wrong happens and if you will need to change some particular part of where you currently is. So using checkpoints is very important, and don't forget to find them every time. So right here we have one at the boss, right here we have one at Grailwood and at Mudburrow. So we're just moving between them without any kind of issue. So picking all three before doing anything is usually recommended. So another important part for your early game progression is Salvage Bench. To get a Salvage Bench, you will need to complete the quest Finding the Forge by handing smithing tools to Renly in Act 1. And when Salvage Bench will be open for you, you will be able to take any equipment with sockets and salvage it, receiving Artificer shards in the process. 10 Artificer shards will be combined for Artificer Orb. And Artificer Orb is going to give you an option to add a rune socket into martial weapon or armor. So if you're playing an attack-based character, using Artificer Orbs at your weapons is going to increase your damage significantly. So getting Salvage Bench as fast as possible, here is Renly if you're missing him, is recommended in a lot of cases. Make sure you're collecting items with sockets and salvaging them to receive Artificer shards and Artificer Orbs. And don't hesitate, if you have a very good weapon, if you just found it, don't hesitate to click it with at least one Artificial Orb and use a particular rune to increase your damage. It's going to help you with the progression. Another important tip in the relation of all of it. To get Artificer Orbs, it's a very great idea to run through all the acts back. So for example, if you're currently in higher act, so you could be like an act 1 in the second run, on act 3 in general, you can always teleport to act 1 and talk with a vendor trying to find items with sockets, and you can buy them for a very small amount of gold. So look, here I have an item with a socket for only 100 gold. I can literally buy it together with those boots, for example. Those are a little more expensive, and that way I can easily receive 2 artificial shards. So if you currently need Artificial Orb, teleporting back through acts and buying items with sockets for a small amount of gold, please check the amount before buying them, is a very good idea. Do it constantly. Another important tip is how we can utilize the vendors in general. So vendors are resetting every time when they are leveling up. So if you leveled up and you are searching for some particular item, it's a very great idea to teleport back and check the vendor. Maybe you will have items with sockets, maybe you will have a new weapon, maybe you will have boots with movement speed, for example. But there are so many cool things that you can receive, and it's going to increase your progression. Check vendors all the time and keep in mind that they're always resetting on your level ups. Another important part, pretty much runes themselves. Since currently we will have a new tiers for attacking runes, such as Storm Rune, for example, I heavily recommend you to use runes that you will be able to find at the start of the campaign without holding them back. Because after that, after some time, you will be able to drop more runes with higher tiers, and they will provide you more bonuses. So those basic runes will be kinda useless for you, and you can spend them without bothering, like at level 15 or level 10 or level 30. So you don't need to collect them and move them to the end game. Another important tip is currency itself. So right now, GGG is going to raise amount of currencies that you're receiving through the early levels of the campaign. So don't hesitate to click your items with currency very often. So for example, transmutation is helping a lot. If you can see an item with a very good basic base, you can click it with transmutation and it will receive one modifier. If you can see an item with just good one modifier and it's already magic, you can click it with augmentation and even try to click it with regals after. The only currency that I would probably keep, it's pretty much divines and maybe exalted to some kind of degree. Everything else should be used while you're progressing campaign without issues. Because regals, augmentations, transmutations, and alchemy are mostly there to improve your progression through early levels, and in the end game, that currency is not really crazy viable and not going to help you significantly. So just click it, slam it, and don't be afraid of it. That tip is much closer to the end of the campaign, but still related to currency. When you will be able to gain access to currency exchange, don't hesitate to constantly use it for your advantage. So for example, if you really need some exalteds to click some of the cool items, use it. If you will need jeweler orbs in particular, don't be afraid to use it too. Jeweler orbs will have a better drop chance right now, and I think their price is probably going to be down pretty fast for everything except perfect. So you can click some additional skills such as Bell, for example, with greater jeweler orbs without spending too much currency. Just keep in mind that prices are jumpy, so check out currency exchange from time to time to make sure you have a very good rate. Another cool tip is connected to your jewelry. Since in the first and second act, vendors are not really selling a lot of jewelry, so right now I have only 2 rings right here and 0 amulets. And if, for example, both rings are not working for you or you need a particular amulet, there's a great way to do that. Just use a gambling vendor for it, because gambling vendor is always giving you an opportunity to receive an amulet, receive a belt, or receive a ring. So if you have additional gold and you just need some particular piece of gear that you currently don't have and there is not a single option to buy it from vendor, just go to a gambler NPC and gamble an amulet. So here, for example, a pretty decent one for the start of the game. You can click it, you can get additional stuff in there, and even if it's not going to be too strong, it's much better than just an empty slot. However, it pretty much moves to another important tip. Don't waste your gold. So gambler, for example, takes a lot of gold from you, especially for basic items, and if you will gamble through them, there's a big chance you're not going to receive a lot of good ones. There's a decent chance to receive rares, so if you need a particular slot, you can just click it. However, I would say that spending too much gold could be an issue, especially since you might need it for a respec or for spending it in the currency exchange later. So I would probably gamble only if it's necessary and if you don't have a particular piece of the equipment at other vendors. Another very important part that some people for some reason are missing is that you will need to pick permanent buffs in the campaign. So when you're going through the campaign, look for those kind of skulls with a little plus to the left from them, and kill the bosses when you're fighting them in your map. So for example, in the first act you will have one here Beira, one here Crowbell, and also you will be able to get like Spirit from King of the Mist. So make sure that in all acts, all enemies with pluses right here and skulls are cleared. You also don't really need to clear just normal enemies with skulls but without the pluses. Look for the pluses together with skulls and you're going to be just fine. Killing those bosses are pretty important, and I recommend to check those at least in the end when you're finishing the campaign. Another important tip right here is that you don't really need to fight them immediately. For example, going for King in the Mist exactly at the moment when you will have an access to Freythorn could be a little too premature. So if you will progress a little forward up to Ognem Manor and will teleport back to Freythorn, which will be like 3 or even 4 levels lower than you will have much easier time progressing through the location, it will be faster, and you will receive your spirit just a little later. So if you don't really feel amazingly strong, feel free to skip that boss and come back for it like 15, maybe 20 minutes later. It's just going to be alright. Make sure that you're not forgetting that, because if you will forget it, you will not receive a proper bonus. The next tip is kinda questionable and mostly based on my guess, however I still think it could be helpful for many players. So in Dawn on the Hunt we are going to have a new mechanic called the Wisps. Wisps are buffing monsters when they are literally flying through them, and that could be a very good way to farm. However, I think for the campaign, Wisps are going to make campaign harder in general. So if you don't really need particular types of items, I recommend to ignore the Wisps while you are doing campaign and start farming them only when you will reach an endgame and waystones. It's probably going to make your progression easier, because I think buffs from the Wisps are going to make monsters pretty hard in some particular moments. The next tip is pretty obvious, but for some reason a lot of people are forgetting about that. It's that you need to always keep your flasks updated. So, for example, if your character is level 10, you need to make sure that your flasks at least level 6 or perfectly 10 as well. You constantly need to buy flasks, and that way it will be significantly easier for you. Also, we don't have a recipe anymore, so you can sell 3 flasks for better flask. And the last part that a lot of people are missing as well, it's a REFORGE bench. You can get REFORGE bench in Act 3. You will need to complete the quest Treasures of Exile by handing the Hammer of Kamasa to Oswald in Act 3. You will get in a boss fight, and there's like a proper DPS check, so make sure you're coming for that quest a little later when you have enough damage, and it will be significantly easier for you that way. However, by itself, the REFORGE bench is a pretty important part, because it will give you an opportunity to literally reforge all 3 items together. Make sure that items should be of the same rarity. So I have 2 rare armors right here and 1 is magic, that's why I can't reforge it. If all of them going to be rare, we will have such opportunity and we can reforge 3 body armors to an unidentified one. It's a pretty important part, because you can reforge a lot of things such as waystones, you can reforge all types of items from magic to rare, and the REFORGE bench should help you a lot. Make sure that you're getting that in the Act 3 and not missing out on that. So that's been a whole set of different tips. I think most of them should be pretty helpful for people with different amount of experience. And I'm sure with those it will be easier for you to run campaign. Just make sure that you're keeping all that in mind and not missing it. However, even if you will be a little slower in campaign, I think it's absolutely fine, because endgame farming is still going to take much more time than just running a campaign itself. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and have an amazing league start. ronarray out.